A lone rancher in the unforgiving Arizona desert never expected trouble to ride straight to his doorstep until a mysterious woman and her strange cargo changed everything. What he found inside that sack would pull him into a deadly game of survival, where every choice could be the last. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Thomas Blackwood's weathered face as he surveyed his drought-stricken ranch. It was the summer of 1885, and the West Fork Territory hadn't seen proper rain in nearly 6 months. His once thriving cattle operation was hanging by a thread, much like the rest of his life. "Damn this heat," Thomas muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. At 42, the former soldier carried the weight of the Civil War in his eyes and a pronounced limp from a Confederate bullet. His wife Sarah had passed 3 winters ago from consumption, leaving him to raise their 12-year-old daughter, Emma, alone. Thomas dismounted his chestnut mare and walked toward the barn, his boots kicking up dust that hung suspended in the still air. Inside, he found his ranch hand Miguel, attempting to repair a broken wagon wheel. "Any luck with that wheel, Miguel?" Thomas asked, his voice carrying the distinctive drawl of a man who'd spent 2 decades in the Arizona Territory. Miguel shook his head, his dark eyes reflecting concern. "No, Senator. We need a new one. The wood has split beyond repair." Thomas sighed heavily. "That's another expense we can't afford. The cattle are already suffering, and the well's running lower each day. Perhaps you could trade with the Hendersons? They owe you a favor after you helped with their barn raising last spring," Miguel suggested, setting down his tools. "Perhaps," Thomas replied noncommittally. The Hendersons had their own troubles. Everyone did these days. As dusk approached, Thomas sat on his porch, watching Emma brush her horse in the corral. She was growing into the spitting image of her mother. Same golden hair, same determined set to her jaw. She'd taken to ranch life with natural ease, refusing to be treated any differently because she was a girl. Thomas felt a familiar mixture of pride and worry watching her. This wasn't the life he'd envisioned for his only child. The distant sound of approaching hoofbeats drew his attention. Visitors were rare this far out, especially with the main road to town having washed out during the spring floods. Thomas reached instinctively for the Winchester rifle he kept by the door. A lone rider appeared through the heat haze, moving at an unhurried pace. As the figure drew closer, Thomas could make out a woman slumped forward in the saddle, her clothing tattered and dusty from long travel. "Emma, get inside," he called, keeping his voice steady to not alarm his daughter. Emma looked up, noticed the approaching rider, and reluctantly complied with her father's instruction. The horse, a handsome black stallion that had clearly seen better days, came to a stop in front of the house. The woman raised her head slowly, revealing a face that, despite being smudged with dirt and marked with exhaustion, still held a striking beauty. Her dark hair was partially hidden under a worn hat, and her eyes, a startling green, locked onto Thomas's with unexpected intensity. "Water," she whispered, her voice cracking from thirst. "Please." Before Thomas could respond, she slipped from the saddle, collapsing in a heap on the ground. Beside her fell a small burlap sack that had been tied to her saddle horn, landing with a soft thud in the dust. Thomas rushed forward, rifle still in hand, but his focus now on the unconscious woman. As he knelt beside her, checking for a pulse, the burlap sack shifted slightly. Thomas froze, staring at it with sudden wariness. The sack moved again, more deliberately this time, and a muffled sound emerged from within, something between a whimper and a plea. With cautious movements, Thomas reached for the sack, his weathered hands hovering over the crude knot that held it closed. The woman's eyes fluttered open momentarily. "Please," she whispered, her gaze drifting to the sack. "Take them off." The trail. Before Thomas could ask what she meant, her eyes closed again, her body going limp. Steeling himself, Thomas untied the knot and slowly opened the sack. What he saw inside made him recoil in shock, his blood running cold despite the oppressive heat. Looking up at him from within the darkness of the sack were 2 small, frightened faces. Children, no more than 5 or 6 years old, with the same striking green eyes as the woman. "Dear Lord," Thomas whispered, his heart hammering in his chest. The children, a boy and a girl, twins by the look of them, stared up at him with a mixture of fear and exhaustion etched on their small faces. "It's all right," he said softly, setting his rifle aside. "I won't hurt you." The children remained silent, pressed against each other inside the cramped confines of the sack. Their clothes were filthy and torn, their faces streaked with dirt and dried tears. "Emma," Thomas called over his shoulder. "Bring water, quickly." Emma appeared on the porch, her eyes widening at the scene before her. "Papa, who is water, Emma, now and fetch Miguel too." As Emma hurried to comply, Thomas gently helped the children out of the sack. They were rail-thin, their skin hot to the touch from being confined in the burlap under the merciless sun. "What's your names?" Thomas asked, keeping his voice gentle. Neither child responded, their eyes darting between him and the unconscious woman. Miguel arrived at a run, taking in the situation with a quick glance. "Madre de Dios," he muttered, kneeling beside the woman. "She's burning with fever, Center." "Help me get her inside," Thomas instructed. "Emma, see to the children." As Miguel and Thomas carefully lifted the woman, Emma approached the twins with a dipper of water. The boy moved protectively in front of his sister, but the sight of the water proved too tempting. Soon both children were drinking greedily, their small hands trembling. Inside the modest ranch house, they laid the woman on Thomas's bed. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps in her late 20s. A faded bruise marred her left cheekbone, and her cracked lips moved soundlessly as if she were trying to speak through her delirium. "She needs a doctor," Miguel said, placing a damp cloth on her forehead. "Nearest one's in Tucson, 2 days' ride," Thomas replied grimly. "And that's if the pass is clear." Emma appeared in the doorway, the twins hovering uncertainly behind her. "They won't say their names, Papa. They won't speak at all." Thomas studied the children thoughtfully. Despite their filthy appearance, their clothes had once been of good quality. The little girl wore a silver locket around her neck, definitely not something a poor family would possess. "Keep them in the kitchen. Give them something to eat, but go easy. Their stomachs won't handle much after what they've been through." As Emma led the children away, Thomas turned back to the woman. "Miguel, check her saddlebags. Let's see if there's anything that might tell us who she is or what she's running from." Miguel nodded and left. Thomas continued bathing the woman's face, noting a scar that ran along her hairline, not old, perhaps a few months at most. Whoever she was, she'd seen trouble recently. A soft moan escaped her lips, and her eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on Thomas's face. "The children," she whispered hoarsely. "They're safe," Thomas assured her. "They're getting food and water." Relief washed over her features. "Thank God." She tried to sit up but fell back with a grimace of pain. "Easy now," Thomas cautioned. "You're in no shape to be moving about." "You don't understand," she said, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "They'll be coming. You have to hide the children." "Who'll be coming? Who are you running from?" The woman swallowed painfully. "My name is Catherine Prescott. Those children, they're my sisters. My sister and her husband were murdered 3 weeks ago. The men who did it, ... They want the children too." Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. Why would anyone want to harm children? Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "My sister's husband was William Hargrove." The name hit Thomas like a physical blow. Everyone in the territory knew of William Hargrove, one of the wealthiest mine owners in Arizona. News of his murder had spread even to this remote corner of the territory. "The Hargrove gold," Thomas said, understanding dawning. "They think the children know where it is." Catherine nodded weakly. "William was paranoid. He converted most of his fortune to gold and hid it. He told only my sister the location. Before she died." She whispered something to Emma, "His daughter, not yours," she clarified, seeing his confusion. "Little James might know too. They've been through so much." They haven't spoken a word since that night. Miguel appeared in the doorway, holding a leather pouch. "Center, I found this in her saddlebag." Thomas took the pouch and emptied its contents onto the bedside table. A few coins, a small pistol, and a crumpled wanted poster. The poster showed a crude drawing of Catherine's face beneath the words. Wanted, Catherine Prescott for the murder of William and Elizabeth Hargrove, $500 reward. Catherine's eyes followed his gaze to the poster. I didn't kill them, she said, her voice breaking. I found them. I tried to save my sister, but she was already dying. She made me promise to protect the children. Thomas studied her face intently, weighing her words. After a long moment, he folded the poster and tucked it into his pocket. Get some rest, Miss Prescott. We'll talk more when you're stronger. As he turned to leave, Catherine caught his hand. Please, she whispered, her eyes filled with desperate pleading. Whatever you decide about me... Don't let them find the children. Thomas nodded solemnly. No one will harm them while they're under my roof. You have my word. Outside the bedroom, Emma waited anxiously. Papa, the little girl spoke. Just one word. She said, Josiah, when I asked who they're afraid of. Thomas felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. He'd come to this remote ranch to escape the violence of his past, to raise his daughter in peace. Now trouble had found them anyway, bringing with it the ghosts of greed and murder. Miguel, he said quietly, saddle my horse. I need to ride out tonight. Where are you going, Papa? Emma asked, worry etched on her young face. Thomas checked his revolver before sliding it into his holster. To set a false trail. If someone's tracking them, I aim to make sure they're tracking in the wrong direction. Dawn broke over the eastern hills, painting the sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold. Thomas, exhausted from his night ride, surveyed the landscape from a rocky outcrop half a mile from the ranch. He'd spent hours creating false tracks leading north toward the territorial border, hoping to buy them some time. The distant sound of riders approaching from the south sent him scrambling for cover. Crouching behind a boulder, Thomas watched as 5 men on horseback followed the main trail. Even from this distance, he could tell they weren't ordinary travelers. They rode with purpose, rifles prominently displayed, scanning the terrain with practiced eyes. The leader, a tall man with a distinctive black duster and wide-brimmed hat, raised his hand, bringing the group to a halt not 50 yards from where Thomas hid. The man dismounted and knelt to examine the ground, his fingers tracing the faint hoofprints Thomas had deliberately left visible. Track split here, Josiah, one of the riders called out. Some heading north, others going east toward the ranch. The man in the black duster, Josiah, straightened up, his face hardening. She's clever, I'll give her that. Trying to confuse the trail, he pointed to 2 of his men. You follow the northern tracks. The rest of you come with me to check the ranch. Thomas's stomach tightened. He'd hoped to lead all of them away, not just a portion of the group. As the riders separated, he slipped back down the slope toward his horse, keeping low to avoid being spotted. He needed to reach the ranch before they did. Taking a shortcut through a dry creek bed, Thomas pushed his tired mount to its limit. The ranch came into view just as he heard the distant thunder of approaching hooves. There was no time to waste. He burst into the yard, startling Miguel, who was chopping wood by the barn. Riders coming! 3 of them, armed and dangerous, Thomas shouted, leaping from his horse. Get inside now. Inside the house, Catherine was sitting at the kitchen table, pale but alert, sipping broth from a mug. The twins sat close to her, their small faces still wary but no longer showing the terror of the previous day. Emma was teaching them a simple hand game, and for a brief moment, Thomas saw the ghost of a smile on the little girl's face. The fragile peace shattered as Miguel rushed in. They're coming, Center. Catherine's mug clattered to the table, spilling broth across the worn wood. Josiah, she whispered, her face draining of what little color it had regained. Emma, take the children to the root cellar, Thomas instructed, his voice calm despite the urgency. Stay there until I come for you, no matter what you hear. Emma nodded solemnly, gathering the twins with practiced efficiency. The little boy clung to Catherine, his eyes wide with renewed fear. It's all right, James, Catherine soothed, gently disentangling his fingers from her skirt. Go with Emma, she'll keep you safe. As Emma hurried the children away, Thomas turned to Catherine. Can you ride? She struggled to her feet, wobbling slightly. If I must, you must, Thomas said firmly. Miguel will take you out through the back way. There's an old line shack about 5 miles east, near the creek bed. Hide there. I won't leave the children, Catherine protested. The children will be safer if you're not with them, Thomas countered. These men are tracking you, not them. If you're gone, I might be able to convince them to move on. Catherine's eyes filled with tears of frustration, but she saw the logic in his words. Promise me you'll protect them with your life. I already am, Thomas replied simply. The sound of approaching riders grew louder. Miguel helped Catherine through the back door toward the waiting horses while Thomas retrieved his Winchester and stepped onto the front porch, positioning himself casually against the support post. 3 riders entered the yard, dust swirling around their horses' hooves. The man in the black duster, Josiah, led them, his cold eyes taking in every detail of the modest ranch. Morning, gentlemen, Thomas called out, keeping his rifle visible but pointed downward. Something I can help you with? Josiah reined his horse to a stop, studying Thomas with calculating eyes. Perhaps. I'm looking for a woman traveling with 2 young children. Dark-haired woman, riding a black stallion. Seen anyone fitting that description? Thomas took his time lighting a cigarette before answering. Can't say that I have. Don't get many travelers out this way since the bridge washed out. Josiah dismounted, his spurs jingling ominously in the morning quiet. His companions remained mounted, their hands resting near their weapons. Mind if we look around? Josiah asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't really a question. Mind telling me what this woman's done? Thomas countered, taking the casual drag from his cigarette. Josiah reached into his coat and produced a folded paper, the same wanted poster Thomas had seen the night before. She's wanted for murder. Killed a prominent businessman and his wife. Kidnapped their children. Thomas studied the poster, feigning interest. Nasty business, but like I said, haven't seen her. That's a fine black stallion in your corral, one of the mounted men observed, nodding toward the horse Catherine had arrived on. Looks tired, like it's been ridden hard recently. Thomas felt a trickle of sweat run down his spine despite the morning chill. That's my horse. Then working the north pasture, checking on strays. Josiah's eyes narrowed. You wouldn't be lying to me, would you, Mr. Blackwood? Thomas Blackwood. And no, I wouldn't lie to a man with a star on his chest. Thomas nodded toward the crude tin badge pinned to Josiah's vest. You're a long way from any town with a sheriff's office. A cold smile spread across Josiah's face. I go where the law takes me, Mr. Blackwood. The tension stretched between them, thick as molasses. Thomas knew the man was no lawman. The badge was likely stolen or fake, but calling him out directly would only provoke violence. Well, Marshal, I've got chores waiting. If there's nothing else, I'd like to see inside your house, Josiah interrupted, already moving toward the steps. Thomas shifted subtly, blocking his path. Got a warrant? Josiah's hand moved to rest on his holstered pistol. Don't need one when I'm in pursuit of a fugitive. The standoff lasted only seconds, but to Thomas, it felt like hours. Finally, he stepped aside. Make it quick. I've got work to do. Josiah brushed past him, the other 2 men dismounting to follow. Thomas trailed behind them as they entered the house, his grip tightening on his rifle. If they found the entrance to the root cellar hidden beneath the rug in the pantry. Cozy place, Josiah remarked, his eyes scanning every corner of the main room. You live alone, Blackwood? With my daughter, Thomas replied, watching as one of the men examined the dishes on the kitchen table. 4 bowls, one still with traces of breakfast. 4 bowls, the man pointed out. My ranch hand eats with us, Thomas explained smoothly. Family tradition. Josiah moved toward the bedroom where Catherine had spent the night. Thomas tensed as the man ran his hand over the rumpled bedding, then knelt to look underneath. Someone's been sick, Josiah observed, noticing the basin of water and cloth beside the bed. My daughter had a fever last week, Thomas said. She's better now. Josiah straightened, his eyes locking with Thomas's. For a long moment, neither man spoke, each taking the measure of the other. Where is your daughter now? Josiah finally asked. Collecting eggs from the henhouse, Thomas lied. Daily chore. One of Josiah's men appeared from the pantry. Nothing in there, boss. Just food stores. Thomas released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They hadn't found the hidden door to the cellar. Josiah gave the room one final sweep with his gaze, then nodded. All right, Blackwood. Sorry to trouble you. If you do happen to see this woman or the children, there's a substantial reward. I'll keep that in mind, Thomas replied, following them back outside. As the men mounted their horses, Josiah turned in his saddle. One more thing, Blackwood. If I find out you've been lying to me, well, let's just say I don't take kindly to being deceived. With that thinly veiled threat hanging in the air, the three riders spurred their horses and galloped away, heading east, the direction Miguel had taken Catherine. Thomas watched until they were out of sight, then rushed back inside, making straight for the pantry. Pulling back the rug, he revealed the trapdoor and yanked it open. Emma, it's safe now. Emma emerged first, helping the twins up the narrow stairs. The children looked terrified, their small hands clutching Emma's skirt. They're going after Catherine, Thomas said grimly. We need to warn her. Dusk settled over the land, bringing with it an eerie stillness. Thomas crouched at the edge of the creek that ran behind the line shack, his experienced eyes scanning for any sign of Josiah's men. Beside him, Emma waited silently, her young face serious beyond her years. I should have gone alone, Thomas muttered, more to himself than to his daughter. The twins trust me, Emma replied simply. They wouldn't have stayed with Miguel otherwise. Thomas couldn't argue with that logic. The Hargrove children had formed an immediate bond with Emma, perhaps seeing in her a source of stability in their shattered world. There, Emma whispered, pointing toward the dilapidated line shack barely visible through the gathering darkness. A light. Thomas narrowed his eyes, catching the faint flicker of what might be a candle through the single grimy window. Stay low, he instructed, beginning a careful approach through the tall grass. They were 20 yards from the shack when a twig snapped somewhere to their right. Thomas froze, pulling Emma down beside him. The unmistakable metallic click of a hammer being cocked sent ice through his veins. That's far enough, came a familiar voice. Miguel stepped into view, rifle aimed steadily at them. Miguel, it's us, Thomas said quietly. The ranch hand lowered his weapon with a relieved sigh. Senator Blackwood. You should not be here. Those men. We know, they're tracking Catherine. Are they close? Miguel nodded grimly. Too close. They passed by an hour ago, heading toward town. But the man in black, Josiah, he left tracks suggesting he circled back. He knows she's nearby. Where is she? Thomas asked. Inside, with a visitor. Thomas's hand moved instinctively to his holster. What visitor? A man she says she knows. He arrived just before sundown, came through the creek to hide his tracks. Thomas exchanged a worried glance with Emma. Stay with Miguel, he told her, then made his way cautiously to the shack. Through a crack in the weathered boards, he could see Catherine sitting at a rough-hewn table. Across from her sat a well-dressed man in his 50s, his silver hair and neatly trimmed beard giving him an air of distinction that seemed oddly out of place in the shabby surroundings. You're sure the children are safe? The man was asking, his cultured voice carrying clearly through the thin walls. Yes, Judge, Catherine replied. Thomas Blackwood is a good man. He's protecting them. Judge? Thomas's mind raced. The only judge in the territory was Harrison Wells, a man known for his uncompromising stance against corruption. Time is running out, Catherine, the judge said gravely. Josiah Crane won't stop until he finds either the children or the gold. And he has powerful friends helping him cover his tracks. I know, Catherine replied, her voice breaking. But the children are all that matter now. William's gold isn't worth their lives. Thomas had heard enough. He moved to the door and knocked softly. Catherine's startled gasp was followed by the scrape of a chair as the judge rose quickly to his feet. The door opened a crack, Catherine's frightened face appearing in the gap. Thomas, she breathed, relief washing over her features. She pulled the door wider. Come in, quickly. Inside, the judge regarded Thomas with keen assessment. Mr. Blackwood, I presume? Thomas nodded, his eyes never leaving the man's hands. And you are? Judge Harrison Wells. The older man extended his hand. I owe you a debt of gratitude for protecting the Hargrove children. Thomas ignored the offered hand, the wanted poster. It's false, isn't it? Completely, the judge confirmed. Fabricated by Josiah Crane and his associates to give legitimacy to their pursuit. In reality, Crane is a hired gun working for a consortium of businessmen who want control of the Hargrove mining interests. The twins' inheritance, Thomas said, understanding dawning. Catherine nodded. With William and Elizabeth dead, and the children too young to manage the business, a court-appointed guardian would control everything until they come of age. And let me guess, the judge who would appoint this guardian has been bought, Thomas said grimly. Judge Wells sighed heavily. Judge Carlton Reed, once a good man, now firmly in the pocket of the mining consortium. I've been gathering evidence against him for months, but the murder of the Hargroves forced my hand. Thomas processed this information, his mind working through the implications. So what's your plan, Judge? I have a private train car waiting in Tucson. I intend to take Catherine and the children to San Francisco, where they'll be beyond Reed's jurisdiction. From there, we can mount a proper legal challenge to protect their inheritance. And the gold? Thomas asked. The reason Crane is hunting them. A look passed between Catherine and the judge, a moment of silent communication that Thomas couldn't decipher. William converted a significant portion of his assets to gold as insurance against his enemies, Catherine explained. He didn't trust banks or business partners. The location died with my sister ... or so we thought. The children know? Thomas asked, though he already suspected the answer. Catherine nodded. Little Emma drew a picture yesterday. A simple childish drawing of a tree with a star carved into its trunk. It matches the description Elizabeth gave me before she died. Outside, a horse whinnied softly. Thomas moved to the window, peering cautiously through the dirty glass. In the pale moonlight, he could make out a lone rider approaching slowly, leading two riderless horses. Crane, he whispered, recognizing the distinctive black duster. Catherine's face drained of color. Where are his men? Don't know, Thomas replied grimly. But he's coming straight for us. Judge Wells removed a small derringer from his coat pocket. Not much with this, I'm afraid. Thomas checked his revolver, then made a quick decision. Catherine, take the judge out the back way. There's a narrow trail through the willows that leads to higher ground. Miguel and Emma are waiting with horses about a quarter-mile upstream. What about you? Catherine asked, her eyes wide with concern. I'll delay Crane. Give you time to get clear. He'll kill you, she protested. Thomas managed a tight smile. Maybe, but I've faced worse odds. The judge took Catherine's arm. He's right, we need to go now. As they slipped out the back, Thomas positioned himself by the front window, rifle ready. Crane had dismounted and was approaching on foot, his confidence evident in his unhurried stride. This was a man accustomed to instilling fear, not experiencing it. Thomas waited until Crane was halfway to the shack before calling out, "That's far enough, Crane." The hired gun stopped, his hand hovering near his holster. "You know my name." "Seems I'm at a disadvantage. Thomas Blackwood." A slow smile spread across Crane's face. The rancher. "Should have known you were lying to me this morning." "Should have," Thomas agreed mildly. "Where are your men?" "Around," Crane replied with a casual wave. "Question is, where are the children, Blackwood? And the gold they know about?" "Gone, along with the woman. And a federal judge who's quite interested in your activities." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Crane's features. "You're bluffing, am I? Judge Wells has been building a case against your employers for months. The murder of the Hargroves was the final piece he needed. You're finished, Crane." Crane's expression hardened. "No witnesses, no case. And when I'm done here, there won't be any witnesses." The standoff stretched between them, the night air heavy with tension. Thomas knew Crane was fast. His reputation as a gunman was well earned. But Thomas hadn't survived a war and 20 years in this unforgiving territory by being slow. "Last chance, Crane, right away. The law's already closing in." Crane's laugh was cold and humorless. "You think I fear the law out here? This is my territory, old man." The insult was calculated to provoke, to make Thomas react emotionally rather than strategically. It was the mistake of a man too confident in his own abilities. Thomas didn't move, didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he watched Crane's eyes, remembering what an old sergeant had taught him during the war. The eyes tell you when a man's going to draw, not his hands. The subtle shift in Crane's gaze was all the warning Thomas needed. As Crane went for his gun, Thomas fired through the window. The shot caught Crane high in the shoulder, spinning him around. But the hired gun was tough. He recovered quickly, returning fire as he dove for cover behind a water trough. Bullets splintered the wooden walls of the shack as Thomas ducked down, moving away from the window. The exchange of gunfire continued for several minutes, neither man gaining a clear advantage. Then suddenly silence fell. Thomas listened intently, hearing nothing but the whisper of wind through the grass and the distant call of a night bird. "Blackwood," Crane called out, his voice strained with pain. "I'm bleeding bad. Let's call a truce." "Throw out your gun," Thomas replied, not moving from his position. "Can't do that. But I've got something better to offer. Information." Thomas remained silent, waiting. "Your daughter and the ranch hand, they're walking into a trap. My men are positioned along the creek trail." Cold fear gripped Thomas's heart. Was Crane bluffing, or had his men indeed circled around to cut off the escape route? "Why tell me this?" Thomas asked, buying time to think. "Because I'm a businessman, Blackwood. I can see when a job's gone bad. Let me ride out of here, and I'll call off my men." Thomas weighed his options. If Crane was telling the truth, Emma and the others were in immediate danger. If he was lying, Thomas couldn't take that chance. "All right," he called out. "But you ride north. Your men are west. You don't join up with them." "Agreed," Crane replied. Thomas moved cautiously to the door, his rifle trained on the water trough where Crane had taken cover. "Stand up slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." Crane rose unsteadily, his left shoulder dark with blood. Despite his injury, his eyes remained calculating, dangerous. "Your horse is there," Thomas said, nodding toward the animals tethered nearby. "Mount up. Ride north until sunrise. If I see you or your men in this territory again, I won't aim for your shoulder." Crane managed a pained smile. "You're making a mistake, Blackwood. The reward for the Hargrove gold would set you up for life." "Some things are worth more than gold," Thomas replied evenly. As Crane mounted his horse with difficulty, Thomas kept his rifle aimed steadily at the hired gun's chest. "One last thing, Crane. Your men, where exactly are they positioned?" Crane's smile widened to a grin. "Now that would be telling, wouldn't it?" With that, he spurred his horse and galloped away into the darkness. Thomas wasted no time. He ran toward the creek, following the path Catherine and the judge had taken. If Crane had been telling the truth about his men, the sound of gunfire erupted ahead, confirming his worst fears. Thomas sprinted through the willows, his heart pounding with dread. As he broke through to a small clearing, he saw Miguel engaged in a firefight with two of Crane's men, while Emma and Judge Wells huddled behind a fallen log with Catherine and the twins. Thomas didn't hesitate. Taking careful aim, he dropped one of Crane's men with a clean shot. The other, seeing his companion fall and now caught in a crossfire between Thomas and Miguel, quickly surrendered. In the aftermath, as they bound the survivor's hands and tended to a minor wound Miguel had sustained, Judge Wells approached Thomas. "That was remarkably good shooting, Mr. Blackwood," the judge observed. "You've had military training, I think." Thomas nodded curtly. "Confederate cavalry, lifetime ago." The judge studied him thoughtfully. "I could use a man with your skills. The children will need protection, even in San Francisco." Thomas looked over to where Emma sat with the twins, telling them a story to calm their fears. In just 2 days, she had become their anchor, their trusted friend. And Thomas realized he couldn't bear to separate them, not after everything the Hargrove children had endured. "They'll need more than protection," Thomas said quietly. "They'll need a family." Catherine, who had joined them silently, placed a hand on Thomas's arm. "Are you offering to be that family, Mr. Blackwood?" Thomas met her gaze steadily. "I'm saying my daughter seems to have adopted them already. And this ranch, though struggling, could be a good place for children to grow up, away from those who might still covet their inheritance." Judge Wells smiled for the first time since Thomas had met him. A guardian chosen by the children's aunt, with no connection to the mining interests. It could work, legally speaking. And it would certainly be safer than San Francisco, where money can buy access to even the most protected individuals. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "You would do this? Take on such responsibility for children you barely know?" Thomas watched as his daughter managed to coax a genuine laugh from little James, the first sound other than fearful whimpers he'd heard from the boy. Some things are worth more than gold, he repeated softly. And every child deserves a home where they feel safe. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, painting the sky once more in hues of pink and gold, Thomas Blackwood realized that his drought-stricken ranch had found an unexpected blessing, not in the form of rain, but in the form of 3 souls who would bring new life to his home and heart.